Hi guys. So I'm back, as you can see, much more grounded, much more level-headed, and hopefully from a place where I can guide and mentor and teach some of the things I've learned on this wild, crazy journey that I've had. I posted a video quite humorously named "Welcome to My Chaos" because uh, I believe that we can still have a sense of humor while deeply struggling or going through difficult times. And I think actually it's really important to have a sense of humor while we're struggling with really difficult things, like childhood trauma, struggling to overcome the effects of childhood trauma. So one thing that's really important to me that I've tried over the years to talk about, but couldn't quite grasp, is complex trauma, and is called complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Maybe you're familiar with it, maybe you have it, maybe you've been diagnosed with it, maybe you've heard about it. This is still kind of a bit controversial, although it's getting more attention now, as it should. It was never really like formally recognized like PTSD. Just let me start off by saying, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jen. I've worked as a sound practitioner for the last 10 years. I have an undying passion for teaching sound. I was a sound practitioner, so I worked in communities where I offered sound baths, one-on-one sound healing sessions, and I worked with a really large, diverse audience with sound. So I worked with cancer patients, I worked with children, I worked with people with PTSD, complex trauma, anxiety, depression, you name it. I also worked with a lot of other people, a lot of other practitioners in, I guess you could say, alternative medicine or the spiritual world that did things like Reiki, acupuncture, trauma-informed yoga. What this did for me was profound. Number one, it was chaos in my life because I didn't have a niche audience. When you are a professional or when you work, sometimes you have a niche audience that you work for. Me, I just took on everything. And that could be partly to do with the complex trauma because we're used to chaos and we adapt to it. But I don't regret it because it opened me up to so many different people that I ended up learning from. And I worked with diverse groups of people, diverse environments that really taught me how sound can affect an individual depending on what they're dealing with. So I don't regret the chaos, but I don't recommend it also. Anyway, let me not backtrack. So that was most of my life. The other part of my life is that I had been struggling very, very deeply for a very, very long time, not understanding the true root cause of what was going on with me internally. I knew that I was always battling something. I just never had a name for it. I never really understood it. And anytime the idea came into mind that, hey, like, something's wrong with you, or not, I'm careful with the way I word things, or you might want to look into what's going on with you mentally and emotionally. And so my life was kind of like a series of chaotic train wrecks, basically, within relationships, within jobs, within my personal life, my family structure, all of that. I was constantly emotionally dysregulated. I was an addict. I was a big alcoholic for most of my life, a lot of my life in secret, a lot of my life very publicly, and struggled with cigarette smoking. I never did any hard drugs. I was never into drugs. I was a pot smoker, but my poison was alcohol. That was my source of comfort and an old coping mechanism that started probably around the age of 12, just around the same time that I started smoking cigarettes. So I come from a dysfunctional family structure. If you saw my first video, Welcome to My Chaos, you'll get a basic summary of where I came from. I don't want to go in depth too much on what I went through in the house that I grew up with in my adoptive home. And for many reasons. For one, what I've learned in this journey, in this process of healing, is that compassion is important, and also forgiveness. And that's something that and integrity, and a person's just divine right to their own dignity and integrity. Even if some of those people were my abusers, they are still living. I'm still learning to form relationships with them in forgiveness, and I respect that they are a human being and they deserve dignity and respect, bottom line. So I don't want to dive into too much personally, but what I can do is give you main overall aspects of the kind of trauma that I grew up in. Okay, so there was pretty much daily violence, emotional, physical abuse, neglect, um, severe narcissistic abuse, and addiction. So my adoptive father has passed away. He passed away about 20 years ago, and so I feel safe and comfortable to talk about him a little bit more freely. My father was a very absentee father, and he struggled with alcoholism until the day he died. He was in and out of rehab, and I think the last time he was kicked out of rehab was because he snuck in Listerine bottles. And if you come from anybody that is an alcohol or struggled with alcohol addiction, you know that they will go to those extremes. And he was drinking the Listerine while he was in a detox center, and so he was kicked out. That was the last one. But anyway, so I grew up, this was very normal for me to grow up around cigarettes, alcohol, violence, and everything that I just named. What I didn't know at the time, because this was my normal, this was my everyday normal of what I grew up in, I didn't know at the time that I was severely abused, that there was abusers in my home, and that also my mother was also severely abused. At the time, this to me just was my everyday normal. There was nobody there to tell me this is terribly wrong. This is not a safe environment for anybody, and you all need help. You know, I didn't have that kind of support growing up, and I blame nobody. These things happen all the time, and I think sometimes there is abuse that happens in front of people, sometimes for everybody to see, and sometimes the abuse can be so shocking that it shocks people into fear and silence, and that's okay. I accept it. We're human beings. I don't blame anybody, and I think that's also a really important part of the healing process, is to take away blame for the moment, okay? Because that can take you on a different path, a very self-destructive path, a very victimized path, and it can get you further away from your actual healing, which should be at the center of what you do every single day. And so I started smoking and drinking and living very destructively very early on in life. And to me, I seemed like I was a normal teenager. I was a normal preteen. I was just doing the things that everyone did. But internally, I was riddled with anxiety all the time. I was often depressed. I ran away a lot. I was self-destructive. I was a cutter. I cut myself quite a bit, inflicting pain on myself. I had zero self-worth majority of my life, and I dealt with something called toxic shame. And as I grew older, these things started to become really, really clear to me that something was wrong. I started to see this really when I entered into relationships, intimate relationships, when I started getting boyfriends and girlfriends, because I've had both. And what I started to see in these partnerships was I was completely emotionally a mess. I was dysregulated. I would react uncontrollably sometimes, erratic. I would have chronic dips in my moods. I would just be very, very difficult to be around, to be honest. I was clingy, I was needy, I was codependent, and I was a victim majority of my life. So once I was always an intelligent person, articulate person, well-spoken person, a very good-hearted, genuine person at my core. But my core belief system was that I was worthless. Nobody genuinely loved me. And I was ashamed of myself. I was ashamed of my whole self. That's it, of just living, breathing, existing. And I think a lot of people with early childhood trauma deeply believe this, unfortunately. And in my 30s, I had met somebody, a friend of mine, that openly spoke about complex trauma. And it's the first time in my life where ding, like a light bulb went off. And I was like, oh, I think I have this thing. But I don't want to admit it. I don't want to admit it. I don't want to look at it. But I think I have this thing. And luckily, she was a roommate. She was a friend. And then we were roommates. We shared an apartment together. She was so open about her struggles, and she started to open about her very dysfunctional childhood. And I could see a lot of parallels. And the only difference was she was extremely self-aware, and she was looking at it, and she was actively seeking help. I was still ignoring it at that point. And she would often send me stuff, like, yeah, Jen, I think you should look at this and look into CPTSD and all of this stuff. And what would happen is she'd send me a video or she'd send me an article or something, and I would read it, and I would feel this anxiety, this fear, this deep shame coming up. And I knew this is exactly what I'd been struggling with my whole life. And I would read a little bit, or I'd watch a video, and then I'd be like, nope, not going there, not going there. And that's okay. I wasn't ready to accept or admit the fact that this is something that I had been struggling with, because I knew if I looked at that, I could not turn around. If I looked at that, I would have to keep looking at it. I would have to have accountability for all the times I messed up relationships, I messed up opportunities. I basically sabotaged myself, because you go into a cycle of self-sabotage with CPTSD. And I thought, I just don't want to do it. I actively said no. But it was always in the back of my mind. It was always sort of like this anxious thing that you have to really one day face this thing, And so it continued. I'm 45 years old. And so it continued, the self-destructive behavior, the self-sabotaging behavior, the self-sabotaging relationships, careers, friendships, spiraling out of control, going in and out of addiction, back on cigarettes, back on drinking, and drinking was never consistent in my life. I would go for long periods of time without it. I would do extremes, but then something would trigger me deeply. A relationship would end, or a job opportunity would end, or I would lose something, and I would go back into drinking. And it could be like 2 years had gone by, so, completely not touching alcohol. And I would go back in it like, bam, and just drink everything in sight and binge for the next, like 2 weeks or something like that, or more, until I would feel so disgusted with myself, in a pool of my own misery somewhere. And I would pick my damn self up, and I would go to the opposite extreme. And I would say, no alcohol, you're fasting, you're going to start yoga 20 times a day, you're going to go to the gym, you're going to, and so my body only ever knew extremes. This is dangerously unhealthy for the nervous system. And so in 2016, I had a very scary incident where I had an abscessed tooth, but that abscessed tooth was serious and almost turned fatal. What happened, if you've ever had an abscessed tooth, it starts to swell out. And that's just the warning signs. You'll feel the pain and your face will start to swell. Now, any normal, I'm careful the way I use these words, but any person that has practiced self-love and knows how to take care of themselves, let's say that, right? And is not in a chronic spiral of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, knows that, wow, my tooth hurts. Something's wrong here. My face is swelling out. I should seek some medical attention for this, right? But no, I, at that time, was living in New York City, working in a high-end spa, working like 12 hours a day. And I was popping pills. I was like, oh, smoking my cigarettes, popping pills. Like, this thing will go down. It's okay, Yeah, I need to get my teeth fixed, but not going to worry about it now. Avoid. Well, by the end of the day, the owner of the spa came to me and he said, if you don't go home right now and see a dentist, I'm going to fire you. He cared about me more than I cared about myself. That's only one example. I looked in the mirror and my face was out to here. It's horrific how I looked. And I thought, yeah, okay, you got to do something, And so I went home, and long story short, I found a dentist. But by the time I found a dentist, it's New York City, okay, on a Friday. By the time I found a dentist that would take me, My face had now swelled up all the way up to the temple. And I mean, it was big. It was massive. My eye was going shut, and it was all the way swollen up here. I had to ride the subway with a hoodie on because I was just scaring kids. I was scaring the general public. It was not cute. And so I found this dentist, and as soon as I opened the door and she saw me, I remember she was like at her desk and she said, "You need to meet emergency surgery now." She made a phone call. She said, "Every dental place is closed right now. This guy is staying open for you. You better get your ass in a taxi and get over there. You need that drained immediately." So she sent me across town in a taxi. And I am forever grateful that this man stood open for me because his practice was closed. It was already after 6 o'clock. He took me in and he pulled the tooth, drained the abscess, and he let me sit for a while. And I was shaking. It was so painful and so scary. And he sat there, and I'll never forget. People always show up kind of in like paternal archetypes for me. And he was a very fatherly, old little Jewish dentist, but very fatherly, very paternal. And he sat there and he took down his thing and he's looking at me and he's giving me time to breathe, and the swelling's going down, the pressure's going down. And he said, "Can I speak to you honestly?" He said, "What happened here?" He said, "You were about 3 hours from that being fatal." He said, "Another couple of hours, that liquid would have seeped into your brain and that would have been fatal. Do you understand?" And it was so shocking to hear that. Like, I couldn't believe that I would ignore my health, my well-being so much that something could have turned fatal. I joke around, but that really scared me. I almost get emotional thinking about it because it really scared the shit out of me to think that I could neglect myself in such a way. How could I do that, But I didn't have time to cry about it or anything like that. So I said, I don't know. And he said, "Please never, ever let something get to that point again." He said, "You need a lot of work to repair what happened in your mouth right now." And so he sent me back to the original dentist, and I set up a protocol with her for the next, I think it was almost 6 months. I had to see her every 2 weeks for the next 6 months. So me and her became friends, right? And I hate dentists. I have since I was a kid. And so I started seeing her. And when I went into her office, she was the only fully holistic dentist in New York City at the time. Her name is Dr. Adele Brand of the Brand Wellness Institute. And she had literally changed the freaking course of my entire life. Never underestimate who you meet in your life and how they are going to affect your life. Because I got into that dentist chair and I thought to myself, this is the weirdest damn dentist I've ever experienced in my life. First of all, she had spa. I worked in a spa and she had spa music on. She had all books about Reiki healing, energy healing, and sound healing, which is something I never heard about, right? And it was like trickling water. She had these water fountains. It was the most soothing experience I had ever been to. And I'm like, how is this a dentist? Well, she was a holistic dentist, right? And so we got very friendly over those next 6 months. And as I sat in that chair, she began to tell me her whole life story. I mean, I had no choice. I was just laying there, my mouth open the whole time, And I thought, wow, this woman's really just telling me her whole life story. So what she did tell me is for the last 20 years, she struggled with chronic Lyme disease. And if you know anything about that, and I've known people personally, it's pretty awful. And also, I always struggle with saying this word, fibromyalgia. I don't know why I have difficulty with that. Fibromyalgia? Did I say that right? Okay. And so she was telling me about her battle with this and how crippling it was and how she almost lost her entire career because of it, because she couldn't work and nobody would help her. And meaning like, modern medicine, the Western world didn't recognize Lyme disease or how to treat it. And so she was forced to look for alternative medicine because she just couldn't stand it anymore. So she tried anything. She told me, she was like, I was so fed up with my with my health and my deteriorating health that if somebody told me to fly to India to eat this piece of dirt that it would help, I would. I mean, she was that desperate, right? And I loved her passion and the way she was kind of humorous about her experience. I really liked that. And so anyway, and she told me she was at her wit's end. Her dental practice was almost over, and a friend of hers went to India and came back with a Tibetan bowl, right? And her friend was just like, I don't know, try this, you know. And she didn't really know what to do with this thing. But anyway, long story short, she started to use sound, and she started to use the bowl, and she started to study the effects of sound and vibration on healing, on overall healing, on the nervous system, on the brain, deep cellular healing, all of this. And she became fascinated, right? And so she is basically giving me my first education of sound, frequency, vibration, and healing. And then she introduced me to a doctor that really changed her life, Dr. Mitchell Gaynor, which has been a big hero in my life. And so she said, get this book. No, I'm sitting here like, I don't even know what sound healing is, but your story is so amazing that I'm about to buy this book, you know? And so the book was The Healing Power of Sound by Dr. Mitchell Gaynor. And he is a man that I studied endlessly. Look him up if you need to. He is a pioneer in sound healing and medicine. But what I loved about him is he did something that I truly admire in people. He bridged the gap between ancestral or like traditional medicine, because he was an oncologist, you know, in New York City Presbyterian Hospital. So he bridged the gap between that world and alternative healing using sound in his practice, which at the time people were like, you're a nut job. But he had the highest rate of cancer survivors of anybody in that hospital. So that says something, right? And so anyway, so she recommended this book. She told me about binaural beats for the brain. And then at one point, she needed to do some serious digging. There was an alternative method to a root canal that would be quite painful. And so she said, while this is healing, before we do the further work, you have homework. I want you to get yourself a pair of headphones, and I want you to listen to these binaural beats. And so binaural beats, if you're not familiar, it's another form of sound therapy that works really directly with the brain. And it uses two notes that are similar on the scale. It doesn't have to be an A and A. It could be an A minus, a and B, something very similar. And the notes are it's a rhythmic pattern through the brain, right? And this helps to create a third brain wave, which actually balances out your overall brain waves, and it can help with anxiety, depression. Look into it, or I'll write, I can add more about binaural beats on here. And so she said, your job is hear these binaural beats. She sent me some links on YouTube. Get these headphones, and in between time, while your tooth needs to heal, I want you to listen to this, because it's going to repair healing. These are specifically for nerves and nerve endings in healing. So please, in the 2 weeks, and then come back, and then we can work on your tooth, right? Did I listen? No, I didn't. Is there any logical reason for me not listening? No. I'm not even going to try to make an excuse. I had the money. I could have gotten those headphones, and I could have listened to those binaural beats, but I chose self-destruction. And so I went home and just, I don't know, didn't listen, I think I even smoked cigarettes when I wasn't supposed to. Anyway, self-sabotage. Anyway, so after the 2 weeks, I come back to the dentist, right? And I lay in the chair. And never forget it. I lay in the chair and I open my mouth, and she, she goes into my mouth and she pushes herself. The dentists are always on that rolly chair. So she rolls herself away from me, slams her hands on the table, and she pulls down her thing and she said, you didn't listen to me. I was like, suddenly I reverted to a 2-year-old. Like my mother was scolding me, and I was like, what? And she's like, you didn't listen to me. I told you to listen to the binaural beats for the 2 weeks, and I can tell you didn't listen to them. And there was no way I could lie to this woman. There was no way. She caught me like I didn't. And I was like, no, I didn't. And she's like, I can see that. And she says, so now I am not going to continue to work. She was so hardcore, but secretly I love people like this. I love it. Because they're not trying to coddle you. They're not trying to pretend. That's actual real care. And so she was like, now I'm not going to work on you. And she's like, this is cause and effect. I told you to do one thing that would help your healing, and you did not do it. And she said, and I spent the better part of how many weeks telling you how I healed myself. And I don't tell that for no reason. And she knew that I was someone that didn't take care of myself. She knew intuitively that maybe I needed to hear all of this, right? And so she said, well, now I'm canceling your appointment. You can go home. You can get those headphones, and I'll see you in another 2 weeks. I was so pissed off because now I had to wait another 2 weeks. And, I had to wait till this thing healed again. I couldn't eat on the side. It was still sore. So it was my own fault, right? And so after that, I left that dentist's office. My ass went right to the electronics store and I bought me some headphones. And I went home that night and I put on those binaural beats. And I'm like, I'm doing whatever she says. And let me tell you how uncomfortable those binaural beats were. And it's not comfortable. If you listen to binaural beats, it's not soothing like a sound bath, right? It's just like pulsating sounds, right? So after like maybe the third night or so, this became much more relaxing and I got into it. But what I started to notice was at first my brain went freaking haywire. I mean haywire. The thoughts escalated. I started feeling panic, so uncomfortable. I was just like, I wanted to shut it off. I hated it. And I just really forced myself, just listen to it. And eventually it started to subside. And eventually, somehow, I think my brain exhausted itself from trying to push against the healing that was happening, that I would pass out. I would knock out. The headphones would be here, and I would be like, because my whole life I had trouble sleeping. Majority of my life, because of my intrusive thoughts, which come along with complex trauma, I would drink myself until I would pass out. That was the only way I would sleep. I mean, this was an every night ritual. I would drink myself to get drunk, and then I would pass out. I'd wake up with an annihilating hangover, but that's the only way I could get sleep. If I didn't, the thoughts, the anxiety, all of this would come, and it was just escapism. I learned from my father. And so, anyway, so this worked, and I was fascinated. This was fascinating me. How's this working? And then I came back and she looked at my mouth and she said, okay, now you listened. And I was like, this woman is either a fucking witch or there is something to this sound. There is something to this, And so then what happened is the more she talked about this, the more I studied about sound healing, and the more I became really interested, and I started looking up online. I got that book on Dr. Mitchell Gaynor, blew my mind. Once I started reading, I couldn't stop. For the first time in my life, I found something that really touched me deeply, that really, really I was fascinated in. Outside of self-destruction, chaos, drinking, getting messed up, crying, depression, I found something that was teaching me something that might actually help me. This was like, whoa. I still didn't know what was wrong with me at the time, but I knew this was it. I mean, I had an idea of CPTSD, but I was only like at the surface. And so I started learning and studying more, and I was like, this is incredible. Like, I should try this. Like, my life has zero direction. I basically felt like a loser. I felt like I had no impact on the world. I felt like I didn't give a shit about what I did. I was taking jobs just to get money, and then I was blowing my money to sabotage myself and drinking myself into stupors and just barely making it month by month in any apartment I've ever lived in. And so I was really getting tired of this shit, And so I had an opportunity, and I found a course that I could take that was offered in Queens, New York, right, where I'm from. And so at the time I was living in New York, and I thought, how incredible. Let's do this. Just so happens, I had the money at the time to invest in this. And so I did. And I purchased this course, and I was like, am I really doing this? But there was this newfound excitement in me. I found the only school at the time in 2016, which was called the Vibrational Sound Association. And they taught with all of these bowls, and it was fast. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I knew there was bowls on the body. There was bowls around the body. I don't know what the hell was happening, but I'm like, this looks so cool. And I took a week off from work, or no, several weeks. I think it was three weeks actually. And I stayed in a hotel where they were showing it. So they give you a discount, right? If you take this course, you can stay in the hotel that they offered it in. And they offered it in a big conference area in this hotel. And it was kind of a cool experience for me because I didn't have the money for that, but this was like all inclusive. And so I got to get out of my home. I got to stay in this little hotel. I got to feel kind of cool taking these workshops every day. Vibrational Sound Association changed the course of my life, as did the dentist that I went to. Let's not forget that. But for the first time in my life, I was recognizing the pain I'd been carrying in my physical body. I'd been recognizing emotions that I had never understood before. And so that course was compiled. It was intensive every single day from, I think, 9 to 6 p.m. So it was full day every single day. And we would get a basic history of sound and its healing properties, history of vibration. We learned how people in cultures, including indigenous, have used sound and vibration to heal. And then techniques on how to use this on the physical body, how to work with people with depression, anxiety, and all these things. And these were, as this was coming to me, even though it was new, at a soul level, I'm like, yes, absorb. Like it was hitting me at such a level that I was like, this is right. This feels right. And so we got to work on each other. It was interactive. We would partner up, and some people would work on me and I would work on them. I should end this video soon because it's long. I'm going to have to make a part 2 because I talk a lot. But anyway, and so what I started to notice the first time that the bowls were on me was incredibly earth-shattering. It brought up so much emotion. My body shook. I would cry for days and days and days. And at that point, it was probably the first time I would have been really vulnerable in front of strangers. But we were all in this space together. And so I was a mess. I was crying nonstop. I actually started drinking again that weekend while taking the Vibrational Sound Therapy Association course. Because there was a bar. I was in a hotel. I was drinking because what was happening is the vibration was entering my body. It was doing something I didn't understand, and I was releasing all of these emotions. And suddenly, sadness that seemed like it would never end was coming up. Intuitively, I knew this was good. My human side was like, this feels shitty, really shitty. And so I started drinking. I drank and took the course. Don't judge me. I was trying to find a way to cope and using my old coping mechanisms while still being open to learning and doing something that was actually helping me. So this is the only balance I could find at that point in my life. And so, yeah, after the course was over, I'd go to the bar, I'd have a meal and have a couple of drinks and I would sleep. But I would get up the next day and be there and come back and come back and come back. Okay, guys, I'm going to start a part 2 because this is long.